So yeah, I'm Andy. I'm the CEO of eArcu, and today hopefully share some different perspectives and hopefully raise a few questions and discussion points for you around candidate experience. We work with organisations from 100 employees to over 100,000, and today we do have some of our clients who are here today. So we have Watches of Switzerland, Lang O'Rourke, and the Kindred Group. So come and have a chat to us, but also have a chat to people who are working with us to get an idea of what it's like and how they feel about what we do with them. So I guess in terms of candidate experience, it's one of those phrases that gets used a lot, but I think actually we tend to take an insular, introspective view of what it is. And really what I want to do is look really how a candidate sees that experience, not how as employers we see the experience. And this isn't around just a percentage increase in the number of candidates and better hires. When it's hard to find people, and that could be customer services, chefs, drivers, IT, all kinds of people where they're elusive and tricky to find, we're talking about an increase of several times the number of candidates when this is done correctly. And of course that gives a platform for having better hires where we use good selection techniques. So really, one of the things we started to look at a little while ago was if you are a candidate and we track that journey, click by click, from when somebody first wants to look for a role right to day one when they're going to come through the door of their new employer, how many touch points do they have with different technologies and different experiences? And what we find is when people think about candidate experience, when there are presentations, when there are awards, it really always centers around the career site and maybe some great video content or some great profiles or maybe a couple of games, but it doesn't really reflect in a consistent way how the candidate goes through the journey. So it can be typically up to 10 different pieces of technology that a candidate will be exposed to in between their first looking for a role and getting to the end of that process. And in very simple terms, that means they may go through 10 different fonts, let alone things like buttons, colors. So to understand the consistency and the experience and what that does for the numbers, we've looked at that in some kind of key areas. So like with many things in life, when someone's going to look for a job, as they do with other things, they may start their journey at Google. It's a good place to start to look. And I would encourage everybody to have a look and search for your own jobs to see what you find when you go to look for your jobs. So if I pick an example of something where it's done pretty well, if I pick the White Company and look for some of their jobs, nice and easily from Google, I can come through and go direct to the career site and make my application. All very, very good. However, let's come back. Let's look at a different experience. Very similar kind of a thing to look for. Here I'm looking for a Tesco job. And one of the real questions we start to see here is around an issue of vacancy theft. So what we're finding is that there are lots of organisations out there who are illegitimately scraping, stealing, using jobs to promote their own brands and then calling employers and selling the virtues that they have, the candidates that you need. So if I pick this one, Nouveau, and we'll just go through. So one of the things that we see here is I've started off saying I want to find a job at Tesco's, but if we look at the URL at the top, we're going off to another site, and immediately I'm having other vacancies pushed to me. So this is really a huge area where candidates are lost and may end up somewhere entirely differently from some of the very, let's say, pioneering activity that's going on the web and some of the activities of companies who've looked at Indeed and how they were successful and then use that model to scrape jobs and push the commercial agenda. So a way where you could easily lose, 3 out of 4 candidates who might otherwise be coming to apply for a role. Now, if I go perhaps to one that's really surprising, so LinkedIn clearly is, I'm sure everybody here is on LinkedIn. And one of the things that we see is actually, although we trust LinkedIn and maybe pay a lot of money, and when it comes to some of the jobs that they pick up and display, again, that may not always be quite what we're expecting. So let's go and have a look. So here I come to, again, a very good employer, does lots of things very well. AstraZeneca, one of the jobs advertised by LinkedIn. And when I click to apply onto that role, what we'll see again is that it's not really coming to the AstraZeneca career site, but this again is going to a third-party site. So even LinkedIn, who are being trusted, and I'm sure you all believe they will absolutely be doing everything ethically. You pay them a lot of money, so they're doing everything in the best possible way. But here we have a blue-chip employer where their role is going off to, again, another third party where those candidates will be lost. And there are countless examples. And if you look at what's happening with your own roles, I'm sure you'll find similar things that are going on. And this also has an impact for GDPR. So from the candidate's perspective, they've started a process where they're applying to the organization they want to work for. And at some point, they will probably have given some details as they go through this process. And who has that responsibility? Because it's likely the candidate may call the employer to ask about the details and ask about a resume, and they may not actually even be there. So what you start to see in many sites is now warnings about fraud. And that's because we're treating the symptoms of this problem, not really looking at the cause as why those candidates are being lost to the employer that they're looking to join. Something else that's very interesting and really started from some work we were doing with Kindred is that probably 50% of candidates come direct from a job board to a specific vacancy. And in particular, this is an issue where there's an HRIS that's being used for the recruitment module on a separate career site. All the investment in the career site may be lost if candidates are finding a job, say on Total Jobs or Monster or Indeed. They come to that vacancy and there they haven't got all the rich collateral that's been built for them on the career site. So let's have a look at what Kindred have done about that. Here we go. So with Kindred, if we find a job through a job board and we come directly to that job board, they have the collateral, so they have the ability to play a video on the company that's directly
If you look up the word Kindred.
All the menuing follows, the chatbot's there, so there's no dilution of the experience. And again, a very common issue is that when candidates land onto a vacancy, where they've come from advertising or a job board, they've bypassed the front door of the career site, so all that collateral is being missed and all that investment is being lost in terms of getting the candidates on to complete their application. Now, one of the other things I find quite curious is from a candidate's perspective, when they're looking for a job, the application form is probably the center point of their journey in looking for a job. Yet if we contrast how much investment takes place on a career site versus an application form, it's probably at least 10,000 times more is invested into the career site than is ever spent on looking at an application form. So let's have a look at some of the things that can be done to make that different. So here I've just come to an example with the White Company. And here they're taking advantage of the opportunity to tell a brand story while a candidate goes through their application process. So really promoting the brand, thinking about the experience, wanting to know that when their candidates talk to their friends, they will be able to talk in a positive light, not only that the career site had interesting collateral, but as they're going through, it gets even more interesting as to what's going on. And there's lots of great things happening with video interviews, for example, but really a video interview isn't really an interview. So a video interview is a very useful technique in terms of presenting questions to candidates and asking them to reply, but that's really an extension of an application form, because in an interview, you have the opportunity to hear an answer and then change the next question based on what somebody's telling you. And that's truly what an interview is about. It's about being fluid and moving. But video interviewing has a place, but why does it have to be a discrete part of the process after a form? So why not have application forms that mix some textual answers, some documents, but also could, for example, have video questions that are within that application form. It doesn't have to be a completely discrete activity that happens, and we need to kind of move away from thinking it's an interview, because it's not really. It's a collection of a multimedia response from a candidate. So very valuable, but break it down and look at it in a different way. One of the other things that I think is quite fun when you're looking at application forms is to think about techniques like animation and gamification. So here we're looking at an example of an application form where it's looking at an advent calendar. So on the one hand, with the White Company, you can tell a brand story, but otherwise, why not look at events going through the year, look at seasonality, make different experiences? Why not look at that 10,000 to 1 investment on career site versus application form and say, let's do something that makes the application process fast, easy, entertaining, and has lots of different elements of content that's served up at the same time. So, yeah, maybe something that is worth considering is those candidates who decide they've got a job somewhere else this time round. And how easy is it for those candidates to decide they want to withdraw their application? And realistically, 99 out of 100 candidates won't be the ones that are hired. They'll be the ones that were unsuccessful or find another role. And how are we managing their perception of what happened when they came to apply for the role? So, for example, how easy can they express their right to remove all their details? And is that simply, as in these cases, that you have to send an email and wait for somebody in HR to try and see if they can remove all the CVs and application forms and try and assure that they've taken everything away? And I think one of the biggest and easiest to understand differences with how we tend to perceive candidate experience from how the candidate sees it is when you look at internally how resourcing is organized. And in the majority of organizations, when we get to offer stage, there's a handover process to HR shared services, HR operations, to other people who are going to manage the journey from once the candidate says yes. But from the candidate's perspective, they're still going for the same job. They're expecting to have a consistent experience all the way until they actually start. So really, the investment around onboarding and the branding and styling needs to be similar to the investment that's gone into the career site at the start. So let's have a look at that. So in my example here, let's go back. My candidate who's going to go through offers and into onboarding comes back to the career site because this is part of the same experience. They're not being sent off somewhere else that's completely different. Is that right? Good. And again, another one of those touch points that candidates go through is how do they sign their offer? If they accept if they look at their offer and they're happy they want to accept it, do they get sent off to a DocuSign or another third-party technology that takes them away from that consistent experience? And again, the logos, the branding, the buttons will all be different. But if it's part of a consistent experience, then they have the confidence and the trust they're carrying on to the next stage of something that is just one transaction for them. So again, using the opportunity to use creative techniques, to use video, to use animation, around going through what can be very boring and dull. So the candidate gets that key stage of accepting their offer, but as they're going to go through to onboarding, they may be asked to complete a lot of paperwork that's really not very engaging. So emergency contact details is not a fun thing to have to do. So here in my example, we just have a fictitious fruit company. And when I'm going to do these fairly dull parts of the process, then I can go through a game where as I go through my process, I'll end up making a smoothie. So taking something that's very boring and saying, we want people to be just as excited when they get to this stage as when we first had some amazing videos, some amazing games when we talked to them very early in the process. And not that it started up here and they feel they've fallen off a cliff and then the employee handbook arrives on the doorstep and they're wondering whether this company is really as exciting as it was made out to be. And this is probably one of those areas where there's a lot of ability to be very creative and do some quite fun things as you go through. For example, making sure people don't vanish at the last minute. So thinking about what happens when there's only a week before somebody joins. You know, some candidates may have a 3-month notice period, and there's always the aspiration from resourcing that there's going to be a lot of activity to keep them warm, keep them motivated, that they won't get cold feet. And quite often chasing a hiring manager and saying, will you keep in touch with your new joiner? Will you make sure to give them a call a week before they join and not undo all of the great work we did all the way through that process? So kind of thing where I think video so far has been largely looking at, do we replace job adverts with video? Do we talk about the company in video? Do we replace video interviews with video interviews? But video is a mechanism to do all kinds of different things. So one of the things that we've looked at is the opportunity for, at offer stage, to record a personal one-to-one video from the hiring manager to their new joiner, with the idea we don't need to hope that the manager remembers or isn't too busy with other projects to get in touch a week before someone joins, but that automatically we can send that welcome to the new joiner from their new manager.
Hey Manuel, it's just a week to go to you're due to.
A bit of latency there.
Hey Manuel, it's just a week to go till you're due to join us here at Fruity Towers. I want to let you know that all the team here in New York are really looking forward to welcoming you on board. We've got a great All the team here in New York are really looking forward to welcoming you on board. We've got a great first few weeks lined up for you. I've put you onto the corporate induction and also put some one-to-one meetings with your new colleagues in the diary. And just so it's not all work, we've got a few social lunches as well. Do make sure you've had a good look through all the information on the onboarding site.
Okay. So in that example, the candidate feels valued. They know their manager has talked to them one-to-one, but we're not worrying and fretting about how many times we have to chase the manager to remind them to get back in touch with the person who's excited to be joining their team. So again, I say I think it's a really interesting experience to not only just go and look at what happens on your career site, what happens when you click apply, but to look at, from a candidate's view, if they start at Google or if they start at Indeed or LinkedIn, following through every step, every click, looking at how that experience will be for them and how many different pieces of kit will they interface with before they get their job for what is just a single transaction for them. So something we put together, and you're welcome to have a copy of this, no matter who you work with, is a checklist that looks very simple things like your logo, the fonts, the navigation, the menus, and allows you just to kind of track through the potential places where a candidate will touch different things you're doing and to understand, is it consistent? And in particular, to extend from just looking from career site until I press search and apply, and knowing that whatever they do over the days, weeks, or months when they're going through that process will be a warm, strong, the best experience it can be. So perhaps over lunch, a few ideas of things that might be worth having a talk about. So yes, how many touch points do you have? You know, how do the candidates get to your jobs? It's again interesting that when we look at a career site, there's enormous detail around the number of people who land on a site, how many clicks they do on the site, how many page impressions they do, what the bounce rate is. But that kind of is missing the broader picture of where they've come from. And do they bypass that completely and go directly to the jobs that are there? And how do we stop vacancy theft? There are all kinds of sites that are out there. While we're sitting here, they're going and taking vacancies, and then they'll be ringing you up all the time saying, we're the people you need to talk to. We've got all the best candidates for your role. And it's probably because they're stealing the vacancies and using them to drive their own businesses at the same time. And of course, the legal aspects that are there. I often get asked, who's a good example of doing this really well? And I would say that it's worth having a chat with Asda. I think they are in a very good place. I don't think anybody yet has got everything completely in one experience from cradle to grave that's there. But it's one of those things where you don't necessarily have to get to the perfect solution straight away, but at least start to look and maybe chart where's the investment going, where's all the time and energy going at each of those stages, and is there a better spread amongst the different elements that are going forward. So have a chat to us if you'd like to, have a chat to some of our clients who are here today, or maybe get in touch with the guys at Asda and ask about how they've changed things and what they're doing. Thank you very much.